Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back, to a period often romanticized but rarely understood in its raw, unfiltered reality. Imagine the chill of damp earth beneath a rough, woven tunic, the faint scent of wood smoke and damp straw always in the air. Picture endless, muddy tracks winding between scattered hamlets, a sky often gray, mirroring the precariousness of life below. You can almost feel the calluses on your palms from endless toil, the dull ache in your bones from dawn to dusk labor, and the constant, nagging worry in your gut about the next meal. Tonight, we're not just reading history. We're trying to breathe it, to feel the weight of it. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this for long. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake, not to the gentle chime of an alarm, but to the insistent crowing of a rooster, or perhaps the hungry bleating of a goat tied just outside your hovel. The air is cold, biting, even though it's summer. There's no central heating, no cozy duvet, just a thin layer of rough wool over your straw-filled pallet. Your bed is a simple wooden frame, perhaps with some ropes crisscrossing it to hold the straw mattress, and you're probably sharing it with siblings, maybe even a pet. Personal space? That's a concept for future centuries, my friend. As you rub the sleep from your eyes, you're already calculating. What's the weather like? Will it rain today and ruin the meager harvest? Is there enough stored grain to last until the next harvest? This isn't a game. This is your life. One mainstream historical fact you quickly internalize. The average lifespan in the early medieval period was often under 30 years. And that's if you made it past childhood, which was a huge if. Infant mortality rates were astronomically high, with perhaps half of all children not reaching adulthood. It wasn't just disease, malnutrition, accidents, and simply the harshness of life picked off the young with alarming regularity. Your clothes are simple, practical, and probably smell faintly of smoke and unwashed wool. You own perhaps two outfits, one for daily toil, one slightly less ragged for special occasions, like attending mass. No quick trips to the laundromat here. Washing clothes was an all-day affair, involving boiling water, lime made from ash, and a whole lot of elbow grease. And even then, true cleanliness as we understand it was a luxury almost unknown. You're more concerned with warmth and durability than fashion. The sun is your clock, the seasons your calendar. There are no weekends, no holidays in the modern sense, save for religious feast days that might offer a brief respite from endless labor. Your entire existence revolves around the agricultural cycle. Spring is for planting, summer for tending, autumn for harvesting, and winter for hunkering down and hoping your stores last. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly understood the concept of leisure time as we do today, or if life was an unending cycle of necessary tasks. Perhaps a quirky tidbit, some medieval texts suggest that peasants might have actually had more holidays and feast days than their later Industrial Revolution counterparts, though these were often local observances tied to specific saints or harvest rituals, not paid days off for beach vacations. As you step out of your dwelling, the village stirs around you. A few scattered huts, made of wattle and daub-woven branches plastered with mud and dung with thatched roofs. Smoke curls from their roof holes. The air is filled with the sounds of animals, the distant thud of an axe, and perhaps the murmur of voices. There's no privacy here. Everyone knows everyone's business, which would be both a blessing and a curse. If you need help raising a barn, the whole village turns out. If you try to sneak in extra chicken from the Lord's woods, everyone will know about it before the sun sets. It's a collective existence, bound by necessity and mutual survival, often under the watchful eye of a local lord or his bailiff. Your life, your land, your very existence is tied to him. The shadow of the Lord hangs heavy over your existence, a constant, undeniable presence. You see, you don't actually own the land you toil on. It belongs to the Lord of the Manor, a powerful figure who, in turn, holds his land from a higher noble, and so on, all the way up to the king. This intricate system is what historians call feudalism, and it's less about cozy castles and more about cold, hard reality for people like you. Your role in this grand hierarchy is that of a serf or a peasant, often tied to the land, which means you can't just pack up your meager belongings and move to the next village if you don't like the look of things. That's a modern fantasy, my friend. You're part of the furniture, so to speak, of the estate. Your life is a constant balancing act between your own subsistence and the demands of the Lord. You owe him labor service a certain number of days each week spent working his fields, repairing his fences, or digging his ditches. This isn't paid work. It's part of your obligation, your rent for the right to cultivate a small strip of land for yourself. Imagine, if you will, spending 3 days a week on your own patch, trying to grow enough to feed your family, and then another 2 or 3 days working for someone else whose success doesn't directly fill your own belly. It's a bit like having a full-time job where half your paycheck goes straight to your landlord, and you also have to mow his lawn, and his neighbor's lawn. Beyond labor, there are dues and taxes. You might owe the Lord a portion of your harvest, perhaps a specific number of chickens or eggs, or even a fee to use his mill to grind your grain into flour. That's right, even the very basic necessities often had a price tag attached by the Lord. There's a certain grim humor in that, isn't there? You grow the grain, you harvest the grain, but you still have to pay to turn it into something edible. It's like buying a coffee bean and then paying extra for the right to use the coffee grinder at the store. A quirky tidbit that might surprise you. Some medieval serfs actually had more rights than you'd think. While they couldn't leave the manor, they couldn't be arbitrarily thrown off their land either. They had a customary right to their strip of land, passed down through generations, and the Lord was, in theory, bound by custom and law to uphold these rights. Of course, in theory and in practice were often very different things when a powerful lord was involved. Still, it wasn't complete slavery, more like a very long-term, non-negotiable lease with some rather demanding clauses. The Lord provides protection, in theory. His castle, often the biggest and most imposing structure around, is a symbol of his power and, sometimes, a refuge during times of invasion or banditry. He dispenses justice through his manor court, arbitrating disputes, punishing crimes, and generally keeping a semblance of order. Historians still argue whether the feudal system was primarily a system of exploitation or a necessary framework for stability in a dangerous, fragmented world. Was it a mutual agreement, or simply the strong dictating terms to the weak? The answer, as with most things in history, is probably somewhere in the muddy middle. You rarely see the Lord himself. He resides in his manor house or castle, far removed from the dirt and grime of your daily grind. His bailiff or reevia, sort of estate manager, often drawn from the more prosperous peasants, is your direct contact, the one who delivers the Lord's demands and ensures your compliance. This intermediary often holds considerable power over your life, too, and can be either a fair arbiter or a petty tyrant. Your survival often hinges on your ability to navigate these relationships, to know when to push, when to defer, and when to simply nod and get back to work. Because the alternative, well, it's not something you want to contemplate while you're trying to eke out a living. Your stomach rumbles, a familiar companion in this life. The quest for food is not a grocery run. My friend, it's a daily, back-breaking struggle against nature and often against scarcity itself. Forget variety. Your diet is, shall we say, monotonous. Largely grain-based, you're looking at a whole lot of pottage, a thick, savory porridge made from whatever cereals you manage to grow: oats, barley, rye, occasionally wheat, if you're lucky. This is the bedrock of your existence. Vegetables like peas, beans, and cabbage might make an appearance if your garden patch is doing well, and perhaps a few wild herbs or berries you foraged. Meat is a luxury, a rare treat often reserved for feast days, or a scrawny rabbit you've managed to snare, hopefully without the Lord's gamekeeper noticing. Imagine spending your days bent double in the fields. The arable land around your village is divided into strips, not neat, modern square fields. Each family gets several strips scattered across different fields to ensure everyone has a share of good and less good soil. This system, known as the open field system, meant that you walked a lot just to get to your various plots. Plowing is done with an oxen team, a slow, ponderous affair that requires immense strength and patience. You're guiding a heavy, wooden plow, the earth turning in thick, clumpy furrows, day after day, week after week. It's a relentless rhythm dictated by the sun and the seasons. One mainstream historical fact is that the vast majority of the population, around 90%, were involved in agriculture. This wasn't just a job, it was life itself. If the harvest failed, you faced starvation. There were no global supply chains to bail you out, no government subsidies. Your survival depended entirely on the whims of the weather and the fertility of the land directly around you. It makes you appreciate modern supermarkets, doesn't it? Just imagine having to personally know every single calorie that enters your body. A quirky tidbit that puts things into perspective. Some historians believe that medieval peasants, despite their seemingly meager diet, might have consumed more calories than many modern office workers, simply due to the sheer physical exertion of their lives. We're talking 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day for a man engaged in heavy labor, mostly from those dense, carbohydrate-rich grains. So, while you might be perpetually hungry, you're also burning through energy at an incredible rate. It's a bit like being a professional athlete, only your sport is not starving to death. Water is another constant concern. You get it from a local well, a river, or a stream. There's no municipal water system, no purification plants. You just hope the upstream neighbor isn't doing anything too questionable. Boiling water was known to make it safer, but that required precious fuel and time. Often, you'd drink ale or weak beer instead of water. Even children, not just for the buzz, though that helped take the edge off a tough day, but because the brewing process killed many of the harmful bacteria. So, yes, your medieval ancestors were basically hydrated by very weak alcoholic beverages. It sounds like a party, but it was just a practical necessity. Historians still argue whether the widespread consumption of weak ale contributed to chronic health issues or actually prevented more severe waterborne illnesses. Was it a vice or a vital public health measure? Probably both, depending on the strength of the brew and the cleanliness of the water source. The tools you use are simple, robust, and handmade. A scythe for harvesting grain, a hoe for weeding, a spade for digging. There's no complex machinery, no gas-powered engines. Every task is manual, every calorie earned through sweat and strain. And the cycle never truly ends. Even in winter, when the fields lie fallow, there's livestock to tend, tools to repair, and fuel to gather. The grind is ceaseless, but then again, so is the determination to survive. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the muddy track, your thoughts turn to shelter. Not a cozy, climate-controlled haven, mind you, but a simple, sturdy hut that keeps out the worst of the elements and provides a modicum of security. This isn't a quick build with prefab materials. Constructing your home is a communal effort, relying on the land around you and the collective knowledge passed down through generations. Your dwelling is likely a wattle and daub structure. Imagine, if you will, a framework of sturdy wooden posts driven into the ground. Between these, smaller branches and twigs are woven together, much like a giant basket, to create the walls. This is the wattle part. Then comes the daub, a delightful, or perhaps less delightful, depending on your perspective, mixture of clay, mud, straw, and yes, often animal dung. This concoction is plastered onto the wattle framework, slowly built up in layers, creating a surprisingly strong and insulating wall. It's a bit like creating a giant, rustic smoothie, only instead of drinking it, you live inside it. And let's be honest, it probably smells a bit like a barn for the first few weeks, but you get used to it. The roof is almost certainly thatched. Bundles of reeds, straw, or heather are carefully layered and bound together, creating a thick, waterproof covering. Thatching is an art form, requiring skill and patience, and a well-made thatch can last for decades. However, it's also a fire hazard, a constant worry in a world where open flames are your primary source of light and heat. One mainstream historical fact is that most peasant homes in medieval Europe were single-room structures, often shared with livestock for warmth during harsh winters. Your cow, goat, or pig might literally be sleeping in the same room as your family, providing a bit of natural heating, a concept we've thankfully moved past, unless you're into very specific glamping experiences. Light is scarce. Tiny, unglazed window openings, often just slits, might be covered with wooden shutters or animal bladders to keep out the wind and rain. Glass is an unheard of luxury. Inside, the flickering flame of a simple rush light, a dried rush dipped in animal fat, or a small lamp filled with oil provides meager illumination. Most activities cease once darkness falls, save for essential tasks around the hearth. Your bedtime is dictated by the sun, not by your favorite streaming series. A quirky tidbit: some medieval peasant homes, despite their simplicity, were surprisingly efficient in terms of heating. The central hearth, often just a stone-lined pit in the middle of the floor, allowed smoke to fill the room before escaping through a simple hole in the roof. This smoky atmosphere, while certainly irritating to the lungs, also acted as an insect repellent and helped preserve timber from rot. So, your ancestors were essentially living in a giant, very effective, bug-repelling smoker. Delightful. There's no chimney as you know it. The smoke from your cooking fire inside simply rises and filters out through the thatch or small opening. This means your home is perpetually filled with a haze of smoke, which stains the interior walls and everything in it a dark, sooty black. You might think this is terribly inefficient, and historians still argue whether the lack of chimneys was due to technological limitations, material availability, or simply a prioritization of other factors like structural stability and warmth. Was the smoky interior a design flaw or an unintended feature with some benefits? It's certainly made for interesting lung health. Furnishings are sparse. A rough wooden table, a few stools, your sleeping pallets on the floor. Storage might be a simple wooden chest or shelves built into the wall. Everything has a practical purpose. There's no room for decorative knickknacks or frivolous possessions. Every item you own is either essential for survival or a tool for your labor. Your home isn't a showpiece. It's a functional shell, a vital barrier between your family and the unforgiving world outside. And as you huddle by the dying embers, the wind whistling through the thatch, you're grateful for every single mud-plastered wall. The ache in your joints, the persistent cough, the dull throb behind your eyes, these are not minor inconveniences. They are ever-present threats in your medieval world. Sickness isn't something you catch and then recover from with a quick trip to the pharmacy. It's a terrifying roll of the dice, and the odds are rarely in your favor. Your body, already weakened by consistent labor and a nutrient-deficient diet, is a prime target for every lurking microbe. Imagine waking with a fever, your muscles aching, your head pounding. What do? There's no doctor's office to call, no emergency room down the road. Your best bet might be the village elder, perhaps a local wise woman, or the priest. Their medical knowledge is a fascinating blend of practical folk remedies, herbal lore, and deeply ingrained superstition. One mainstream historical fact is that medieval medicine was heavily influenced by the ancient Greek theory of humorism. This belief held that the body was composed of 4 basic fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and illness occurred when these humors were out of balance. So, if you had a fever, they might try to cool you down, perhaps by bleeding you, which, as you can imagine, often did more harm than good. It's a bit like trying to fix a leaky pipe by drilling more holes in it. Herbal remedies are your primary defense. For a stomach ache, perhaps a concoction of mint or chamomile. For a wound, a poultice of crushed plantain leaves. These aren't always baseless. Many traditional herbs do have genuine medicinal properties, but without precise dosages or understanding of infection, their efficacy is hit or miss. And for anything truly serious, like a broken bone or a deep infection, your options are grim. Infection, in particular, is a silent killer, turning a simple cut into a life-threatening ordeal. There's no penicillin, no antibiotics, just prayer and perhaps some boiled water to clean the wound, if you're lucky enough to know that helps. A quirky tidbit: some medieval medical texts prescribed rather interesting treatments. For baldness, one recommendation involved rubbing a mixture of bear grease and mouse droppings onto the scalp. For toothache, you might be advised to carry a mole's foot in your pocket or burn a candle over the aching tooth until it fell out. It makes you wonder if some cures were worse than the ailment itself, or perhaps just tests of your sheer desperation. It's a stark reminder that what we consider common sense today was once utterly unknown. Diseases like dysentery, smallpox, measles, and tuberculosis are rampant, often sweeping through entire villages with devastating effect. There's no understanding of germ theory, so hygiene practices are, by modern standards, non-existent. Waste is often thrown into the streets or just outside dwellings. Water sources are easily contaminated, and personal cleanliness is a distant second to basic survival. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly understood the link between sanitation and disease, or if any improvements were purely coincidental byproducts of other practices. Did they consciously try to avoid sickness through cleanliness, or was it simply a matter of tidying up? The answers are as murky as the village well water. Childbirth is another incredibly perilous event for both mother and child. Without proper sanitation, medical knowledge, or pain relief, it's often a life or death struggle. Many women die in childbirth, leaving families shattered and children orphaned. The fragility of life is a constant, stark reality ingrained in your very being. Every morning you wake, every evening you fall asleep, you know that survival is not guaranteed. And yet, life continues, pushed forward by sheer will and the hope that tomorrow will bring another day of health, another day of sun on the fields, another day to simply be. As you stumble out of your smoke-filled hut, the scent of wood smoke mingling with the damp earth, you become acutely aware of the pulse of your village. This isn't just a collection of huts. It's the epicenter of your world, a small, self-contained universe where every face is familiar and every relationship is intertwined. You depend on these people for everything, from help with the harvest to a shoulder to cry on when times get tough. But make no mistake, this close-knit existence isn't always idyllic. It's a cauldron of cooperation, gossip, and sometimes simmering conflict. Your life is a constant, intricate dance with your neighbors. When a field needs plowing, you might pull your oxen with another family. When a new hut needs raising, the whole village turns out, hauling timbers and slapping mud onto wattle frames. This communal effort is not simply altruism, it's a matter of survival. One mainstream historical fact is that many medieval villages operated on a system of mutual aid, formalized through shared labor and resource allocation. If one family's crops failed, the community might collectively help them through the lean times, understanding that next year it could be them. It's the ultimate pay-it-forward scheme, just with much higher stakes. But where there are people, there are disputes. Perhaps your neighbor's chicken scratched up your newly sown seeds. Maybe a boundary stone has been moved, subtly shifting the line between your meager strips of land. Or perhaps it's simply the age-old drama of unrequited love, a petty slight, or a whispered rumor that takes on a life of its own in the absence of outside distractions. These aren't abstract problems. They hit close to home, quite literally, as your neighbors are often your only companions. A quirky tidbit: some medieval villages had rather ingenious ways of resolving disputes before they escalated. They might employ a peace weaver, often an older woman, whose role was to mediate arguments and smooth over ruffled feathers with tact and a good dose of local knowledge. Sometimes solutions involved rituals, like a communal feast to mend broken bonds, or even a trial by ordeal for more serious accusations, where the accused might have to grasp a hot iron or plunge their arm into boiling water. Spoiler alert, not a great track record for proving innocence, but it certainly discouraged repeat offenders, one way or another. It's a far cry from a trip to small claims court, isn't it? The village has its own informal hierarchy, too. The reeve, perhaps the most prosperous peasant, acts as the Lord's direct representative, collecting dues and organizing labor. The village elder, often revered for their wisdom and experience, might be sought out for advice. The local priest, if your village is lucky enough to have one, holds immense spiritual and social authority, guiding souls and settling moral quandaries. These figures maintain order, but their power often relies on the consent and cooperation of the community. Historians still argue whether medieval village life was primarily harmonious, a testament to communal resilience, or fraught with internal tensions and rivalries barely kept in check. Was it a shining example of cooperation, or a constant struggle for limited resources and social standing? The truth, as you might guess, probably lies in the specific dynamics of each individual village, some undoubtedly more peaceful than others, but all united by the common struggle for survival. As dusk settles, bringing with it the sounds of sheep bleating and the lowing of cattle, you gather with your family around the flickering fire. There might be stories told, songs sung, or simply the comfortable silence of shared exhaustion. This is your world, your entire universe, contained within the sight of the village church tower and the surrounding fields. It's demanding, precarious, and often brutally unfair, but it's also where your identity is forged, your connections lie, and your resilience is tested day in and day out. One day, the whispers start. A merchant caravan, they say, passed through a neighboring village, heading toward a place with actual walls and more than a handful of thatched roofs. This tantalizing prospect is the town, a distant, almost mythical concept to you, a creature of the soil. While your village is the beating heart of your daily existence, towns are the fledgling arteries, pumping a different kind of lifeblood into the medieval landscape, trade and commerce. Imagine the novelty. You've probably only ever seen a few dozen faces your entire life, the same ones around the village well. But in a town, there would be strangers. People from other regions, perhaps even other lands, speaking different dialects, wearing different clothes. It's a sensory overload. The air would be thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, certainly, but also cured leather, exotic spices, wood smoke from bakeries, and the tangy scent of brewing ale. The sounds would be a cacophony of hawkers shouting their wares, the clatter of carts on cobblestones. Imagine, and the low hum of hundreds, perhaps thousands of voices. It's a medieval symphony of barely controlled chaos. These towns, small as they were by modern standards, were economic hubs. One mainstream historical fact is that the growth of towns and the resurgence of trade in the High Middle Ages marked a significant shift away from the purely agrarian, localized economy of the early medieval period. There were places where goods could be exchanged, where specialized crafts could flourish, and where money, not just labor or produce, began to circulate more freely. It's a bit like seeing a dollar bill for the first time after only ever bartering chickens for grain. If you ever made it to a town, perhaps to sell a few eggs or a woven basket you painstakingly crafted, you'd encounter things you've only ever dreamed of. A market square teeming with activity. Merchants hawking cloth dyed in vibrant colors, unlike the drab browns and grays of your homespun wool. Tools forged by dedicated smiths, sharper and more refined than anything in your village. Perhaps even a glimpse of a silversmith or a shoemaker, skilled artisans who made a living from specialized crafts, rather than the all-encompassing grind of farming. A quirky tidbit. Medieval towns often had strict regulations on trade, designed to protect local artisans and prevent unfair practices. Guilds, powerful associations of craftsmen and merchants, controlled who could practice a trade and how goods were produced and sold. If you wanted to be a baker, you didn't just set up a stand. You had to apprentice, learn the craft, and be approved by the Bakers Guild. It's like having a union, a quality control board, and a secret society all rolled into one. And woe betide anyone trying to undercut prices. You might find your goods mysteriously ruined or your shop empty of customers. The social structure in towns was also different. While still under the authority of a lord or bishop, townspeople, particularly merchants and skilled craftsmen, often had more personal freedom than serfs. They were not tied to the land and could, in some cases, even buy their freedom. Town air makes free was a common saying, meaning that if a serf could escape to a town and remain there for a year and a day without being caught by their lord, they became a free person. This was a powerful magnet, offering a glimmer of opportunity, a chance to escape the endless cycle of feudal obligation. Historians still argue whether the allure of towns was primarily economic, the chance for greater wealth, or social, a prospect of personal liberty and anonymity. Was it gold or freedom that truly drew people from the fields? For you, it might just be the sheer wonder of seeing something different. So, as you work in the fields, pulling weeds or scything grain, you might occasionally cast your eyes towards the distant horizon, imagining the bustling streets, the colorful stalls, and the distant murmur of a world far removed from your quiet, muddy existence. A world that, slowly but surely, was beginning to reshape the very fabric of medieval society. The tranquil rhythm of village life, punctuated by the seasonal demands of the farm, can be shattered in an instant by the clang of steel and the distant sound of trumpets. This is the specter of warfare, a brutal reality in the medieval world, and while you might not be a knight in shining armor, its consequences ripple through your life just as profoundly. You are, after all, a resource, a source of labor, and sometimes simply an unfortunate bystander. Imagine the rumor spreading like wildfire through the village. The Lord is mustering his men. Or worse, a rival lord, or even a band of ruthless outlaws, is rumored to be in the area. Your heart sinks. For you, warfare isn't glorious, it's terrifying. It means your meager harvest could be plundered, your livestock driven off, your huts burned to the ground. It means your sons, brothers, or even you might be pressed into service, armed with little more than a sharpened tool to defend the Lord's interests. One mainstream historical fact is that medieval warfare was less about grand, decisive battles and more about localized raids, sieges, and skirmishes designed to secure territory, wealth, or influence. Knights, the iconic armored warriors, formed the elite cavalry, but the bulk of medieval armies were made up of foot soldiers, peasants, and townsmen, often reluctantly conscripted, armed with spears, bows, and whatever they could fashion. So, while you might dream of jousting, the reality is more likely to be cowering in a ditch while armed men rampage through your fields. Castles, those imposing stone fortresses, were the ultimate symbols of power and defense. They weren't just fancy homes. They were military strongholds designed to withstand sieges, store provisions, and project the lord authority over the surrounding lands. If your village was near a castle, you might find some protection within its walls during an attack, though often it was the surrounding land and its inhabitants who bore the brunt of the violence, providing the fodder and resources for the fighting. It's a bit like having a very large, very secure safe in your neighborhood, except the contents being protected aren't yours, and the people trying to crack it often break all your windows on the way. A quirky tidbit: medieval sieges could last for months, even years, and were often more about starving out the defenders than direct assault. Besieging armies would often destroy crops, fell trees, and block roads, essentially laying waste to the surrounding countryside. Unfortunately, sometimes they'd even catapult dead animals or diseased corpses over castle walls to spread sickness among the inhabitants, a rudimentary form of biological warfare. Suddenly, that plague outbreak makes a little more sense, doesn't it? The concept of chivalry, as seen in romantic tales, was largely a code of conduct for knights among themselves, often forgotten when dealing with commoners or enemies. For you, the peasant, warfare was indiscriminate. It meant famine, displacement, and death. There were no Geneva Conventions, no rules of engagement protecting civilians. You were simply part of the landscape to be conquered, exploited, or destroyed. Historians still argue whether medieval warfare, despite its brutality, inadvertently spurred technological advancements in engineering, metallurgy, and logistics. Did the constant need for better defenses and weapons lead to societal progress, or was it a purely destructive force that stifled development? For you, ducking behind a tree while men in armor gallop by, it's hard to see the upside. Yet, you learn to adapt. If raiding parties are common, perhaps you learn to hide your precious grain in secret caches. You might become adept at quickly driving your livestock into the woods at the first sign of trouble. The constant threat of violence becomes another layer of the harsh reality you navigate daily. And when the fighting finally passes, leaving behind scarred fields and shattered peace, you simply pick up the pieces, rebuild what you can, and pray it doesn't happen again too soon. Because for you, survival isn't about winning battles, it's about enduring them. As the sun begins its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a different kind of bell tolls from the small, squat tower of the village church. This isn't just a building. It's the spiritual heart of your community, and its influence permeates every aspect of your medieval life. For you, the peasant, the church isn't an abstract concept. It's a tangible presence that offers solace, demands obedience, and weaves itself into the very fabric of your daily existence, blending faith with deeply ingrained superstition. You spend your Sundays and often various feast days throughout the week inside its cool, damp stone walls. The Mass, recited in Latin by the priest, is largely incomprehensible, but the rituals, the incense, the flickering candles, and the solemnity of it all are deeply impressive. You kneel on the cold, hard floor, listening to sermons about sin, salvation, and the fiery torments of hell. One mainstream historical fact is that in medieval Europe, the church was arguably the most powerful institution, wielding immense spiritual, political, and economic authority. It owned vast lands, collected tithes, a tenth of your produce, mind you, and dictated moral conduct for everyone from king to commoner. It was in many ways the ultimate landlord and moral compass. The priest, often the most educated person in your village, is more than just a spiritual guide. He's a record keeper, recording births, marriages, and deaths. He offers advice, mediates disputes, and can be a source of comfort in times of hardship. He might even teach a few children the rudiments of reading and writing, if he's so inclined, though that's a rare luxury. His blessings are sought for everything from a good harvest to healing a sick child. It's a bit like having a local celebrity, social worker, and doctor all rolled into one, except he can also excommunicate you. Beyond formal doctrine, everyday life is saturated with a fascinating mix of Christian belief and older, pre-Christian superstitions. You might pray to a specific saint for protection against a particular illness, or wear an amulet to ward off evil spirits. The timing of planting crops might still be influenced by lunar cycles or ancient folk wisdom, alongside Christian blessings. You might believe in fairies, goblins, or mischievous spirits that inhabit the woods and streams, even as you cross yourself and recite prayers. Historians still argue whether medieval popular religion was a genuine fusion of pagan and Christian beliefs, or simply a pragmatic adoption of whatever spiritual practices seemed to offer the best chance of survival and good fortune. Was it syncretism, or just hedging your bets? For you, it's just the way things are. A quirky tidbit: medieval commoners often performed small, personal rituals that might seem odd to us today. People would sometimes leave offerings of food or drink for household spirits to ensure good luck. Touching a relic of a saint, even a tiny fragment of bone or cloth, was believed to have immense healing power, leading to a thriving market in sometimes dubious relics. Imagine thinking that a piece of bone from someone who died centuries ago could cure your persistent cough. It gives old school medicine a whole new meaning. The fear of hell and damnation is a potent force. Confession, penance, and good deeds are seen as vital for securing your place in heaven. Funerals are somber affairs, marking not just the end of a life, but the beginning of a soul's perilous journey. The church provides a framework for understanding death, and so, as you go about your daily chores, whether it's mending a fence or pulling weeds, the distant chime of the church bell serves as a constant reminder. It calls you to prayer, marks the passage of time and anchors your life within a spiritual worldview that explains everything from the plague to a bountiful harvest. It's a powerful, comforting, and sometimes terrifying presence, shaping your decisions and your destiny in ways you might not even fully comprehend. The familiar mud of your village tracks feels like home, but sometimes a desperate need or a rare opportunity calls you beyond the well-trodden path. This is when you confront the immense challenge of travel in the medieval world. Forget paved roads, signposts, or even a basic map app. Every journey is an undertaking fraught with peril, a test of endurance against natural obstacles and human threats. Imagine setting out from your village, perhaps to visit a relative in the next manor, or to attend a distant market. Your feet are your primary mode of transport. No cars, no bikes, certainly no public transit. You walk, and walk, and walk some more. Your shoes, if you even have them, are likely simple leather affairs, offering little protection against the jagged stones and the ever-present mud. One mainstream historical fact is that medieval roads were, for the most part, simply ancient tracks, often poorly maintained, if at all. They became quagmires in wet weather and dusty, rutted nightmares and dry spells. A journey of what we might consider a few hours today could easily take days, even weeks, on these primitive routes. It's like embarking on a wilderness survival trek just to get to the next town over. The risks are manifold. Bandits are a very real concern, lurking in forests or along isolated stretches, ready to relieve you of any meager possessions. Wild animals, too, pose a threat, though perhaps less common than the human variety. The weather, as always, is an unpredictable adversary. A sudden storm can turn a dirt path into an impassable bog, or a winter snowfall can leave you stranded and exposed. And without accurate maps or clear directions, getting lost is a genuine possibility, turning a detour into a life-threatening ordeal. A quirky tidbit: medieval travelers often relied on prominent landmarks, a specific ancient tree, a unique rock formation, or a distant church spurred to navigate, rather than named roads. They would also follow rivers or coastlines as natural guides. This meant that if you were relying on oral directions, you'd get instructions like go past the gnarled oak, then follow the stream until you see the 3 standing stones, and then head towards the peak shaped like a sleeping giant. It sounds charmingly rustic until you're lost in a fog and realize every tree looks gnarled. Accommodation along the way is sparse. If you're lucky, you might find a monastery or a friendly peasant family willing to offer a night's shelter for a small fee or a shared meal. More often, you're sleeping rough, huddled by a small fire, with only the stars and the rustling leaves for company. Inns do exist, particularly in larger towns, but they are often boisterous, crowded, and not always the safest places for a lone traveler with any valuables. Historians still argue whether the challenges of medieval travel contributed to the insular nature of medieval society, or if the slow but steady flow of goods and ideas on these difficult routes gradually fostered broader cultural exchange. Did the difficulties keep communities isolated, or did necessity always find a way to connect them? For you, wiping the mud from your brow and checking for suspicious shadows in the woods, it certainly feels like isolation is winning the argument. Yet, despite the dangers, people traveled. Pilgrims journeyed to holy sites, merchants transported goods, and even peasants occasionally ventured beyond their familiar horizons for trade, family matters, or simply curiosity. Each journey was an act of courage, a testament to human resilience and the fundamental need to connect, to survive, and to seek out something beyond the immediate confines of your village. As you put one foot in front of the other, the destination seems impossibly far, but the hope of reaching it propels you forward through the dust and the mire. Stepping out into the medieval world means you're not just battling hunger and disease. You're also wrestling with the practicalities of clothing and hygiene, a far cry from your modern wardrobe and morning routine. Forget fast fashion or a quick shower. Your clothes are your armor against the elements, and personal cleanliness is, shall we say, a more rustic affair. Imagine pulling on your daily attire. For you, a peasant, it's likely a simple tunic made of coarse wool or linen, perhaps reaching to your knees. Over this, you might wear a simple cloak or a heavier tunic for warmth. Your trousers, if you have them, will be loose-fitting breeches or stockings. Women would wear a long dress or tunic, often with an apron and a head covering, which wasn't just for modesty, but also practical, protecting hair from dirt and grime. One mainstream historical fact is that clothing was incredibly expensive and labor-intensive to produce. Every thread was spun by hand, every piece of fabric woven on a loom, and every garment sewn with painstaking effort. You owned very few outfits, and they were worn until they literally fell apart. It's the ultimate slow fashion, born of necessity, not trend. The colors of your clothes are likely muted. Undyed wool in shades of brown, gray, or cream. Brighter dyes were costly and reserved for the wealthy. And as for the scent, well, imagine wearing the same wool tunic for weeks, if not months, without a thorough wash. It's a blend of wood smoke, sweat, animal odors, and whatever else the day brings. You probably don't notice it because everyone else smells similar. It's a bit like living in a perpetual vintage shop, but without the pleasant scented candles. Now let's talk hygiene. There are no indoor bathrooms, no running water, and certainly no soap dispensers. For personal cleansing, you might use a basin of cold water drawn from the well, or perhaps visit a nearby stream. Soap, if available, was a harsh, lye-based concoction, more for laundry than for delicate skin. Bathing, as we understand it, was rare for most commoners. It was often done in wooden tubs, using precious heated water, and usually only a few times a year. This isn't because people didn't care about cleanliness, but because the resources, water, fuel, time, required for a full bath were immense. A quirky tidbit: despite the general lack of full-body bathing, medieval people did practice forms of personal hygiene. They commonly washed their hands and faces daily. Many people would also clean their teeth with rough cloths or abrasive powders made from herbs or even ground bones. So, while you might not smell like a fresh spring meadow, your face might be cleaner than you imagine, and your breath slightly less offensive, perhaps. It's a testament to human ingenuity to make the best of limited resources. Lice and fleas are a constant companion. Your hair, if long, would likely be braided or tied back to minimize infestation, and regular delousing with fine-toothed combs was a common, if unpleasant, chore. It's a perpetual battle against tiny, itching invaders. Historians still argue whether medieval people were truly oblivious to the link between poor hygiene and disease, or if their practices were simply the most efficient given their technological and economic constraints. Did they simply not know better, or were they doing the best they could? For you, trying to scratch that persistent itch without drawing too much attention, the distinction hardly matters. So, as you mend a tear in your threadbare tunic or scoop water from the well for a quick rinse, you understand that your appearance is dictated by practicality and survival, not by trends or personal preference. You are dressed for the life you lead, a life of hard work, constant exposure, and an ever-present hum of uninvited biological companions. Life in your medieval village isn't just about farming and fending off disease. It's also about navigating a rough-and-ready system of law and order. Forget complex legal codes and courtrooms filled with lawyers. Justice in your world is often local, immediate, and sometimes terrifyingly brutal. There's no escaping the consequences of your actions, and appeals are rare. Imagine a dispute erupting in your village. Perhaps someone stole a chicken, or a fight broke out over a perceived insult. Who do you go to? Your first recourse might be the village elder or the priest, hoping they can mediate a peaceful resolution. But if that fails, the matter likely goes to the manor court, presided over by the Lord's bailiff or steward. This isn't a grand judicial proceeding. It might be held in a barn, the open air, or a designated hall, with the entire village potentially present, watching. One mainstream historical fact is that manorial courts were the primary form of justice for peasants. These courts dealt with everything from petty disputes over property boundaries and marital squabbles to more serious crimes like theft and assault. They enforced local customs, which often varied from manor to manor, and upheld the Lord's authority. It's a bit like a small-town mayor's office, a police station, and a courtroom all rolled into one, but with a decidedly more direct approach to sentencing. The punishments can be severe, even for minor infractions. Fines, often paid in produce or labor, are common. For more serious offenses, public humiliation might be employed, being put in the stocks or pillory, where you're exposed to the taunts and rotten vegetables of your neighbors. This serves as a stark warning to others. For theft, you might lose a hand or even your life, depending on the value of the stolen goods and the Lord's mood. There's no rehabilitation program, no concept of time served in a comfortable prison. Justice is swift and often merciless, designed to maintain order and deter further crime through fear. A quirky tidbit: medieval courts sometimes used trial by ordeal to determine guilt or innocence, especially for serious crimes where evidence was scarce. This could involve an ordeal by water, where the accused was thrown into a pond. If they floated, they were deemed guilty because the pure water rejected them. If they sank and drowned, they were innocent, which, frankly, is a tough way to prove your point. Or there was the ordeal by hot iron, where the accused had to carry a red-hot iron a certain distance, and the speed with which their burns healed was taken as a sign of divine judgment. It's certainly a unique approach to jurisprudence, though perhaps not one that would hold up in a modern appeals court. It certainly makes you wonder about the innocence rate, doesn't it? The system is not always fair. The Lord's will, or that of his bailiff, can sometimes supersede custom. Corruption isn't unheard of, and if you're poor and without influence, your chances in court are slim. Historians still argue whether medieval justice was primarily a tool of oppression, designed to keep the lower classes in their place, or a necessary, albeit crude, mechanism for maintaining social cohesion in a chaotic world. Was it about rights or about control? For you, facing the judgment of the manor court, it's very much about survival and avoiding the more gruesome penalties. So, as you go about your daily life, you are keenly aware of the unwritten rules and the harsh consequences for breaking them. You learn to settle disputes peacefully if possible, to avoid drawing attention, and to generally keep your head down. Because in a world without formal police forces or elaborate legal systems, the enforcement of law and order is a very personal, very immediate, and very unforgiving matter. As the vibrant greens of summer fade to the muted browns and grays of autumn, a palpable tension begins to settle over your village. This isn't just a change of seasons. It's the harbinger of winter's chill, a period of intense struggle where merely staying warm becomes a full-time occupation and the threat of starvation looms larger than ever. Your medieval home, as you'll recall, isn't exactly built for comfort. Imagine the biting wind whistling through the cracks in your wattle and daub walls, the damp earth floor radiating a pervasive cold, and the air inside your hut perpetually thick with the smell of smoke from the tiny central hearth. There's no thermostat, no cozy blankets from Amazon. Your survival depends on meticulous preparation and an almost obsessive focus on fuel. One mainstream historical fact is that securing enough firewood was a critical winter task, often taking precedence over other chores once the harvest was in. Entire families would spend days foraging in forests, hacking away at fallen branches, and laboriously hauling logs back to the village. Every splinter of wood is precious, every ember vital. It's a bit like an extreme camping trip that lasts for 4 months, with all your family, and no car to escape to. The cold seeps into your bones. Your clothing, while practical, isn't designed for Arctic conditions. You layer what few garments you possess, perhaps wrapping your feet in rags to keep them from freezing. The livestock, often sharing your dwelling for warmth, become vital sources of heat. Their body warmth is small, but significant contribution to the internal temperature of your hut. Imagine spooning your daily pottage, still steaming, but feeling the cold seeping through the walls, your breath visible in the air. A quirky tidbit: medieval homes often had low ceilings, which helped trap what little heat was generated by the hearth. And while chimneys were rare, the smoky interior, as we discussed, wasn't just a fire hazard. The soot acted as a rough insulation, and the smoke itself, believe it or not, helped dry and preserve any meats hung from the rafters for storage. So your living room doubled as a giant, very primitive smokehouse efficient, if not exactly aromatic by modern standards. It really shows how every element of their building design served multiple purposes. Winter also brings a crushing stillness. The fields lie dormant, frozen solid. Travel becomes even more hazardous, isolating your village further from the outside world. Social interaction often shrinks to the confines of your own dwelling or the occasional hurried visit to a neighbor. The days are short, the nights long and dark, broken only by the feeble flicker of your rushlight. Historians still argue whether the long, dark winters fostered deeper communal bonds as families huddled together, or if the intense confinement and scarcity led to increased friction and hardship within households. Did the cold bring people closer or drive them quietly mad? Perhaps it depended on the family and how much ale they had stashed. The threat of illness is amplified, weakened by cold and often dwindling food supplies. Your body is more susceptible to disease. A simple cold can quickly escalate into pneumonia, a potentially fatal condition without modern medicine. Children and the elderly are particularly vulnerable, and the graveyard often sees new additions once the thaw begins. This makes every sunrise in winter a small victory, a testament to endurance. As you huddle closer to the dying embers, the wind howling outside, you listen to the rhythmic breathing of your family, grateful for their warmth, their presence. Winter is a season of survival, a harsh reminder of your vulnerability to nature's unyielding power. But it's also a testament to resilience, to the deep-seated human instinct to simply endure, to make it a spring, when the first green shoots will offer a whispered promise of renewal. Just when you thought life couldn't get any tougher, the medieval world throws its most terrifying challenges at you: famine and plague. These aren't just bad years or isolated outbreaks. They are existential threats that can decimate populations and reshape the very fabric of society. You, the humble peasant, are on the front lines of these cataclysms, with little defense and nowhere to run. Imagine the spring after a bitterly cold, wet winter. The seeds you painstakingly sowed last autumn rot in the soggy ground, or the late frost nips the tender shoots that manage to emerge. The summer brings relentless rains, or perhaps a scorching drought, ruining what little survived. This isn't just a bad harvest, this is a famine. One mainstream historical fact is that periodic famines were a grim reality of medieval life, often triggered by prolonged bad weather, crop diseases, or the disruptions of warfare. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, for instance, caused widespread starvation and death across Europe, a stark reminder of humanity's dependence on agricultural output. For you, it means your meager stores are quickly depleted, your body grows weak, and the constant gnawing of hunger becomes an unbearable ache. You see your neighbors, your family, growing gaunt, their eyes hollow. There's no food aid, no emergency relief, just the desperate hope for a miracle or the grim reality of slowly starving to death. And then, as if the heavens conspired against you, another terror emerges. Whispers of a new sickness, unlike any seen before, begin to filter in from distant towns. People are dying, not just the usual infants or the elderly, but healthy young adults. Black swellings appear on their bodies, fevers rage, and death comes swiftly. This, my friend, is the plague. While several diseases caused widespread death, the Black Death of the mid-14th century is the most infamous, a devastating pandemic that wiped out an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's population in just a few years. Imagine half the faces you know in your village simply gone, replaced by an eerie silence. It's a bit like watching your entire contact list slowly disappear, but in real life and much, much smellier. A quirky tidbit that adds to the horror. Medieval people had no understanding of germs, or how the plague spread. They attributed it to divine wrath, astrological alignments, or even poison wells. Some communities engaged in desperate and often misguided attempts to ward it off, like ringing church bells constantly, lighting aromatic fires in the streets, or holding religious processions. Others, tragically, turned on minority groups, blaming them for the catastrophe. It's a chilling reminder of how fear and ignorance can compound tragedy. The social fabric unravels. As the plague sweeps through, fear paralyzes communities. Laborers die, fields lie fallow, and the delicate balance of the feudal system is thrown into chaos. Survivors grapple with immense loss and a world transformed. Historians still argue whether the Black Death ultimately weakened the feudal system by creating a labor shortage, thereby empowering the surviving peasants with more bargaining power, or if its immediate impact was simply one of unmitigated devastation and despair. Did it sow the seeds of future social change, or was it purely a cataclysm? For you, watching loved ones succumb to the invisible enemy, it feels like nothing but pure, unadulterated horror. You might try to flee, but where would you go? The roads are dangerous, and other villages might refuse you entry, fearing you carry the contagion. Your best, and often only, recourse is to stay put, pray, and hope that somehow, miraculously, you are spared. These periods of famine and plague are the ultimate tests of medieval survival, stripping away any pretense of stability and forcing you to confront the raw, brutal fragility of human existence. After the trials of famine and the terror of plague, the very act of waking up feels like a small miracle. Your world has been irrevocably altered, yet life, stubbornly, persistently, continues. This final chapter of your medieval journey isn't about overcoming impossible odds to build a kingdom, but about the quiet, often unacknowledged small victories of everyday life. The remarkable human capacity for enduring and adapting. You learn to read the signs of the weather with an almost primal intuition, to gauge the health of your crops with a farmer's keen eye. You become adept at mending, patching, and making do with what little you have. Every tool is cherished, every scrap of fabric reused, every meal savored. This isn't just frugality. It's a deep-seated respect for resources born from constant scarcity. Remember that worn tunic? You've probably patched it so many times it's more patch than original fabric, but it keeps you warm, and that's what matters. One mainstream historical fact that becomes abundantly clear is the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Despite constant hardship, threat, and loss, medieval people found ways to celebrate, to connect, and to find joy. Feast days, local festivals, births, and marriages were opportunities for communal revelry, a chance to momentarily forget the grind and reaffirm the bonds that held the community together. Even a simple evening by the fire, telling stories or singing songs, becomes a precious act of defiance against the harsh realities of existence. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates this resilience. After major plagues, wages for laborers often increased dramatically due to the scarcity of workers. This sometimes led to a temporary improvement in living standards for surviving peasants, who might have more land available to them and better terms from their lords. It's a grim silver lining to an unimaginable tragedy, but it shows how economic forces, even in medieval times, could shift in unexpected ways, briefly empowering those at the bottom of the social ladder. You learn to live with uncertainty, to cope with loss, and to find strength in community. The rhythm of the seasons, though often unforgiving, also brings renewal. Spring brings new growth, the promise of a fresh harvest, and the return of longer, warmer days. It's a cyclical existence, yes, but one punctuated by moments of quiet triumph. A healthy child born, a bountiful harvest, a successful trade at the market. These aren't the grand narratives of kings and queens, but the vital, personal victories that make up the vast majority of medieval lives. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were primarily fatalistic, passively accepting their lot, or if they actively sought to improve their circumstances through ingenuity, small rebellions, and subtle acts of resistance? Were they resigned, or were they quietly striving? The answer, as you've experienced, is likely a complex tapestry of both. As you drift closer to slumber, imagine the quiet satisfaction of a full belly, even if it's just pottage after a long day's work. Feel the rough warmth of your hand-woven blanket, the familiar scent of wood smoke, a comforting lullaby. The world you've inhabited tonight was a demanding one, a test of endurance unlike anything most of us could comprehend. Yet, within its harsh realities, human beings found ways to persist, to adapt, to innovate, and to cultivate deep, abiding connections. They built civilizations, raised families, and left behind a legacy of sheer tenacity. The sounds of the medieval world begin to fade now. The distant bleating of a sheep, the gentle rustle of straw, the soft crackle of a dying fire. The echoes of a life lived by the sun, the soil, and the simple, profound hope for another day. Feel yourself sink deeper into your own comfortable bed, surrounded by the quiet hum of modern life, a world far removed from the dirt and toil, the constant struggle and the small, hard-won victories of your medieval ancestors. Let the stories of their resilience gently carry you into a peaceful, dream-filled sleep.